Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're watching a real-time macroeconomic showdown. It's literally the classic unstoppable force meets an immovable object. On one hand, we've got this wild, unprecedented tech boom sending global markets through the roof, but on the other hand, the world's largest economy is executing a massive structural U-turn in its international trade policy. These two forces are barreling toward each other, and if you want to understand where the global economy is heading in 2026, we have to unpack what happens when they collide.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the AI semiconductor boom, then dive into Taiwan's record market frenzy, shift over to America's trade pivots, and finally, bring it all together with the global economic collision.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the AI semiconductor boom.
To really grasp the scale of what we're talking about, we need to zoom way in, down to the microscopic hardware actually powering this whole AI revolution. Because, before the algorithms can do their magic, you need the physical silicon to compute them. Get this, $30,000. That's the estimated cost of a single cutting-edge 2-nanometer wafer from TSMC right now. 30 grand. Industry reports are projecting that this ultra-advanced silicon is so expensive, it's going to eat up nearly a third of the entire production budget for premium smartphones in 2026. Think about that for a second. We aren't just looking at regular inflation here. This is a total paradigm shift in what the world is willing to pay for absolute top-tier computing power.
And honestly, you can see the ripple effects of that insane demand right here. Driven by this bottomless global appetite for AI tech, Taiwan's export orders haven't just grown, they've absolutely skyrocketed. Look at that massive surge in March, a staggering 65.9% year-over-year jump. In hard cash, we're talking about an all-time high of $91.1 billion in just one single month. The global scramble for advanced electronics and semiconductors is moving at a pace we literally haven't seen before.
But why the sudden gold rush? Well, it's not just marketing hype. It comes down to pure physics. TSMC's jump from their 3-nanometer chips to mass-producing these new 2-nanometer chips is a huge leap. If you're a tech giant, you're looking at a 10 to 15% boost in performance without using a drop of extra power. Or if you're running massive server farms or building mobile devices, you can slash power consumption by up to 30% and keep the exact same performance. When you're locked in a global race for AI supremacy, you absolutely cannot afford to miss out on those kinds of efficiency gains. Suddenly, that $30,000 price tag makes a lot more sense, right?
Which brings us to Section 2, Taiwan's record market frenzy. When a specific tech sector goes on a run like this, the capital markets are right there engineering new ways to ride the wave. Take a look at this comparison. Notice the 0043A fund. This is a new, actively managed ETF that actually bypasses typical regulations to allow a 30% cap on a single stock holding. It's totally tailor-made to capitalize on TSMC's absolute dominance. See, older passive funds like the 0050 index just blindly track the broad market, which means they end up being over 60% TSMC by default. But this new active fund lets managers heavily target the AI growth stocks they actually want up to that 30% limit while ditching the underperformers. And investors, they're eating it up. This fund pulled in a record-breaking 80 billion new Taiwan dollars straight out of the gate.
But since this explainer is all about the big picture, we have to talk about how hot this market is running right now. The Taiwan Stock Exchange, or TAIEX, has smashed through a historic 40,000 points. The broader market's price-to-earnings ratio is sitting way up there at almost 30 times earnings. We're also tracking an 18% bias ratio against the quarterly moving average, which is just a fancy way of saying prices have strayed dangerously high above their normal baseline. Add to that the liquidity risk. When you drop an $80 billion capital magnet like that new ETF into the market and it's forced to buy up smaller supply chain stocks, it can artificially pump up prices. Make no mistake, this is a market priced for absolute perfection.
Now let's switch gears and look at Section 3, America's trade pivot.
So, we've established the irresistible force of this AI-fueled tech boom in Taiwan. Now we need to zoom out and meet the immovable object. This timeline gives us the critical historical context from the U.S. perspective. We aren't just talking about recent headlines, we're talking about decades of massive structural shifts. Back in 1976, U.S. goods trade was pretty much balanced. By 1997, you had U.S. manufacturing employment hitting its absolute peak at 17.4 million workers. But then, fast forward to 2024, and the U.S. hits a jaw-dropping, record-breaking $1.2 trillion trade deficit in goods. $1.2 trillion! It's this decades-long bleeding of manufacturing and exploding deficits that triggered a massive structural response, leading straight to the America First trade policy rollouts starting in 2025.
And the White House has been very explicit about their goals here. As this policy document shows, the current administration is actively trying to throw the gears in reverse.
They're focused on confronting what they see as a global trade system that has lost its fairness and reciprocity. So the US government is now using its massive market weight not just as leverage at the negotiating table, but to fundamentally rebuild its domestic industrial base. They're prioritizing critical supply chains and national security over the old idea of frictionless, globalized free trade. It is a massive U-turn from the consensus we've seen over the last few decades.
Which brings us to the climax in Section 4, the global economic collision.
Here is the core tension of our entire explainer. What exactly happens when a bottomless global demand for hyper-advanced foreign tech crashes into a rigid, protectionist trade wall? To shield domestic supply chains from foreign overcapacity, the U.S. administration is pulling out heavy-hitting tools, like Section 232 tariffs. Rooted in the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, this basically gives the government the power to slam the brakes on certain imports if relying on them is deemed a national security threat. And you guessed it, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, and AI hardware are sitting directly in the crosshairs of that national security intersection.
When you map it all out step by step, the collision course is pretty much locked in. Step 1. The AI revolution demands these incredibly expensive, hyper-advanced chips. Step 2. Taiwan almost completely dominates making them, sending their exports up by nearly 66% and lighting their stock market on fire. Step 3. At the exact same time, the U.S. is deploying aggressive tariffs to wipe out a $1.2 trillion trade deficit and pull manufacturing back home. Which brings us to Step 4. The absolute most critical hardware supply chains in the world are now caught straight in the crossfire. It is literally the irresistible force of technological progress slamming face first into the immovable object of geopolitical trade barriers.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question for investors, for the tech world, and for the global economy. Will the massive gravitational pull of AI innovation and the billions of dollars backing it just bust right through these new geopolitical walls? Or will aggressive trade policies actually force a painful, incredibly expensive rewiring of where and how the future of technology is built? It's a macroeconomic tightrope, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch it play out. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the forces shaping our world.